They say no man in Hollow Creek ever walked into the saloon looking for salvation. But one night, he did, and she was wearing a red dress, singing low beneath the smoky lamps. Elijah Booth wasn't the type to linger where whiskey flowed and men lost their dignity. He was a rancher, raised hard by the Wyoming wind, with calloused hands and quiet eyes that had seen more loss than most men twice his age. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, and didn't much believe in happy endings. But that night, well, the snow piled high against the wooden steps of the Broken Lantern Saloon. Something made him stay. She was up there on the stage, not dancing like the others, not even trying to charm the crowd, just singing slow, eyes closed, voice soft like something remembered from a better time. There was sorrow in her, tone-real sorrow, the kind a man doesn't fake. And when she opened her eyes, she caught him watching. Not like the others did. Not with hunger. But with something else. Something like recognition. Her name was June. No last name. Folks called her Red on account of the dress, the hair, or maybe just because it was easier than asking about the bruises she hid with powder. Elijah didn't know why he spoke up that night. Didn't know why his voice sounded steadier than he felt when he told her, "You need to leave this place." She blinked at him, startled, like no one had said anything kind to her in a long while. "I don't need saving," she said quietly. "I'm not offering that," he replied. "Just a way out." He didn't know then that she'd already tried. Running once and paid the price in cracked ribs and silence. But something in his voice made her believe, for a heartbeat, that maybe not every man wanted something in return. The saloon owner, Mr. Danton, saw them talking, didn't like it. Elijah wasn't dumb. He knew Red was someone's property here, even if the law wouldn't say it out loud. But he also knew Danton was a coward, and cowards backed down when faced with quiet men who didn't blink. The next morning, June stepped outside with nothing but a threadbare shawl and a tin box of belongings. And Elijah was waiting with his wagon. He didn't say much on the way back to his cabin. The snow came down like feathers torn from heaven, and the trail back was near invisible. She huddled beside him, trembling from cold and something deeper. When they reached the ranch, 3 horses, a barn half collapsed, and a cabin that smelled of wood smoke and loneliness, he opened the door and simply said, "You can stay safe here." That night, she sat by the fire while he boiled beans and mended a saddle strap. Her eyes wandered the room like she didn't know what it meant to have silence without fear. There were no locks, no threats, no hands grabbing where they shouldn't. Just the pop of the fire and the slow simmer of something too new to name. "You gonna ask me what I did?" she finally said. "No, why not?" "Because it doesn't matter." She didn't cry. Not then, but her shoulders dropped a little, like she'd been holding up the weight of her whole story, and someone finally said she didn't have to carry it alone. They slept in separate rooms. He gave her his mother's quilt and the bed nearest the window. Winter settled heavy outside, wrapping the land in silence. And still, every night she'd hear him in the next room, tossing, mumbling, waking from dreams that sounded like war. He was haunted, same as her, just by different ghosts. It wasn't long before the sheriff came riding out. Danton had friends, and he wasn't about to let a girl slip away without making someone pay. But Elijah met the lawman at the edge of his property, eyes calm, voice firm. "She's my wife," he said. It wasn't true. Not then. But it was the only thing that'd make them leave her alone. And when the lawman asked for proof, Elijah pulled a wedding ring from his late mother's jewelry box and slid it onto June's finger without a word. She stared down at it like it burned, not because she didn't want it, but because she didn't believe she deserved something that pure. Later that night, when the wind howled and the cabin creaked like it remembered old storms, she sat across from him and asked, "Why would you lie for me?" He looked up, and his voice was rough with something unspoken. "Because I've seen what men like Danton do, and I ain't gonna be one of the men who looked away." June didn't answer, but she didn't take the ring off either. That was the beginning. Not of love, not yet, but of something gentler, like two stray souls who found each other in a storm, unsure of what came next, but willing to sit by the same fire until they figured it out. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start. What do you think about Elijah's quiet decision? Was it bravery, kindness, or something he didn't fully understand himself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this slow-burning tale speaks to your heart, there's more snow, more truth, and more healing ahead. The days that followed were wrapped in white silence. Snow buried the world outside the cabin, drifted high against the barn walls, and softened the harsh edges of the land until even the fences seemed gentler. Inside, Time moved slower. There was no saloon music, no shouting men, no slammed doors, or leering glances. Just the creak of old wood, and the slow rhythm of two people relearning what peace felt like. June kept to herself at first. She cleaned the stove without being asked, mended the fraying edge of Elijah's old curtain, and swept the floors like it was a habit she couldn't shake. But he noticed the way she'd flinch whenever the wind knocked a shutter loose, or how she'd touch the wedding ring with the tips of her fingers, like it was a dream that might vanish if she looked too long. Elijah didn't ask questions. Not about her past. Not about the bruises that hadn't faded yet. He just offered space. Quiet. Respect. The kind of care that never demanded anything in return. And slowly, she began to breathe. One morning, as snow fell in lazy spirals outside, she caught him staring at the window, hands still, eyes far away. "You ever been married for real?" she asked, breaking the silence between them. He didn't answer right away, just let out a long breath and said, "Once. A long time ago." It ended in silence, same as most things. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. Some people walk with you for a time, then they don't. I learned to be thankful for the part where they did." June studied him then, like she was seeing him for the first time. He wasn't handsome in a town square way. His face was too weathered, too honest. But there was something in him that steadied the room, made the cold feel less sharp. She turned back to the fire, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one's ever protected me without expecting something back." Elijah didn't move, didn't smile, just said, "Then maybe it's time someone did." That night, she left the bedroom door slightly open. She didn't say why. Maybe it was a test. Maybe it was hope. Elijah didn't cross the threshold, but he paused when he saw the light from her room, as if to say he noticed and respected it. The days passed like that, slow, deliberate. The snowstorm trapped them together, but it didn't feel like prison. It felt more like waiting, like healing. And every evening, over bowls of stew and cornbread, they'd speak a little more. About horses, about music, about nothing and everything. One night, she brought out a small harmonica. Said her father had given it to her before he rode west and never came back. She played something soft off key, but sweet. Elijah closed his eyes. "My ma used to hum that while fixing saddle straps," he murmured. Ain't heard it in years. Something passed between them then. Not desire, not yet, but recognition, like two wounded animals circling the same fire. But peace never stays long in the West. By the fifth day, hoofbeats echoed down the ridge. Elijah's shoulders tightened as he stepped out with his rifle slung low, not raised yet. June stood behind the door, fingers white around the edge of it, listening. Two riders. One had a sheriff's badge. The other man with a stitched scar from temple to jaw, leather coat to clean for the trail. Danton's cousin, hired gun. "Elijah Booth," the sheriff called out, cold breath rising in the air. "We heard rumor. You're harboring a runaway." Elijah didn't shout, didn't reach for the gun. He just walked forward, slow and steady, boots crunching the snow. "She's my wife," he said again, this time louder, "and she ain't going back." The scarred man spat in the snow. "Marriage don't change debts, Booth. She took something that wasn't hers." Elijah narrowed his eyes. "You mean her own life?" The standoff stretched long. The sheriff looked uneasy. Maybe he didn't care much for Danton's money. Maybe he'd seen too many girls disappear behind saloon doors. "You got papers?" the lawman finally asked. "No," Elijah said. "But I got my word. And if you try toking her from here, you'll have to go through me." There was something final in his voice. Not loud, just certain. After a long silence, the sheriff tipped his hat, muttered something about settling this later, and turned back. The gunman glared hard, but he followed. When Elijah stepped back into the cabin, June was sitting by the fire. Her eyes glistened. She didn't speak, just stood, walked to him, and placed her hand over his heart. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I did," he replied softly, "because no one ever did it for me." And in that moment, something old inside her cracked. Not pain, but the thing pain covers. Trust. The snow didn't last forever. By the time the thaw began, trickles of water ran down from the eaves like tears the cabin had been holding in too long. The world outside slowly re-emerged, muddy, brown, stubborn as ever. Life in the West didn't pause for long. Not even for healing hearts. Elijah returned to his daily work, mending fence posts, hauling water, fixing the old corral gate that winter had blown half loose. June watched him sometimes from the porch, a blanket around her shoulders, the ring on her finger catching glints of spring light, like it finally belonged there. Neither of them spoke of the night with the sheriff. It was past, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than words. One afternoon, she followed him out to the barn. He was brushing down his old gelding, a steady animal named Boone. Same color as the dirt roads after rain. "I want to help," she said, voice uncertain. He didn't look up. "You already do." "No, I mean, outside. Real work, not just sweeping floors." Elijah glanced at her then, face unreadable. "You ever mucked a stall before?" She smiled, just a little. "You saying I can't?" "I'm saying, it ain't the same as pouring drinks. That's the point." So he handed her a shovel and pointed to the far stall. No fanfare, no lecture, just trust and the chance to choose something honest for herself. June worked beside him until her back ached, hands blistered, and sweat carved lines through the powder she no longer wore. When she finished, her laugh surprised them both. "I smell like the back end of a mule," she said, wiping her brow. Elijah grinned for the first time in weeks. "Then you're doing it right." That night, they ate by lantern light. Beans, biscuits, and an apple pie he'd hidden for her birthday, though she hadn't told him when it was. She didn't ask how he knew. Just stared at the flickering candle he'd stuck in the crust, lips parted like she couldn't believe she was allowed to be celebrated. Afterward, she stepped outside alone, barefoot on the porch, the cool wood grounding her. The sky stretched wide and endless above, a river of stars unbroken by noise or smoke. Elijah joined her after a while, a blanket draped over one arm. "Can I ask you something?" she said, not looking at him. "Of course. Why did your first marriage end?" He was quiet long enough that she almost took it back. "She left," he said finally. "Said I was too quiet, too slow. Said life was out there, not in some cabin full of ghosts." June looked over, unsure what hurt more, the story, or how softly he told it. "You still love her?" "No," he said without hesitation. "But I loved who I was when I thought I was enough." She touched his arm gently. "You are." They didn't kiss that night. Didn't need to. Something deeper passed between them, in the dark recognition again. That rare kind of knowing that doesn't demand more. Just says, "I see you. Still here. Still trying." But peace has a way of stirring things up. You thought you'd buried them. Next morning, a letter arrived. Delivered by a farm boy riding the south road. Elijah read it once, jaw tight. June saw his hand tremble, just barely. "What is it?" she asked. He folded it, slid it into his coat. "Old debt. Trouble. Could be. Depends on whether I face it or run." "Then don't run," she said, fiercer than she expected. He studied her a long time. "You really want to stay caught up in all this?" "I already am." Elijah nodded slowly. "Then there's something we need to do first." That afternoon, they rode into town together. Folks stared. Some with surprise, some with judgment, but most with simple curiosity. June didn't flinch. She rode with her back straight, her red hair tied back, the wedding ring glinting like a flag no one had the right to question. They walked straight to the little church on the hill. No guests, no preacher. Just Elijah, June, and a prayer whispered into the still air. "You sure?" he asked, holding her hand. She nodded. "This time, I choose." He slipped the same ring onto her finger. This time, it wasn't protection. It was promise. Afterward, as the clouds gathered and a light rain began to fall, June stepped outside into the drizzle and lifted her face to the sky, laughing. It wasn't the loud, performative kind. It was quiet, warm, from somewhere deep. Inside her, inside the cabin that night, she found the letter Elijah had hidden. It was from a man named Jeremiah Booth, his brother, a name Elijah hadn't spoken. The letter said he'd be arriving soon. Said he needed help. Said it was about something only blood can set right. June folded it back carefully and set it where she found it. She didn't ask. She knew he'd tell her when he was ready. Because now they weren't hiding. Not from the past. Not from each other. The knock came just past on 3 slow raps. Solid like judgment. Hollow like regret. Elijah had been splitting wood behind the cabin when he heard it. And in the stillness of the morning, even June flinched at the sound. She stood near the stove, apron dusted with flour, hands motionless over half-formed biscuits. He opened the door before she could say a word. And there, hunched against the gray sky, boots thick with red Wyoming dust, stood a man who looked like a mirror broken and rearranged. Same jawline, same deep-set eyes, but harder, leaner, like life had been less forgiving. Jeremiah, Elijah said quietly. Been a long time, brother. June watched from the corner. Elijah hadn't mentioned him since the wedding. Not in words, but in restless nights and quiet stares. She'd known something was stirring. Jeremiah stepped inside, shook off the road like a man used to moving on. His eyes flicked to June. So, this her? Elijah nodded once. June, this is my brother. She extended a hand. Jeremiah didn't shake it, just gave a short nod. Heard you came from the broken lantern. She met his eyes without flinching. And you came from something else broken, too, didn't you? Jeremiah's smile was tight, almost a wince. Fair enough. They sat down around the table, and the silence between the brothers stretched so long, it felt like the house might buckle under it. Finally, Jeremiah pulled out a folded sheet, creased, dirty, stained with something darker than ink. This was Poss, he said. Found it after he passed. You remember that shack up near Three Pines Ridge? The one he always kept locked. Elijah's jaw worked. Yeah, well, turns out he'd been hiding something, or someone. The room went still. Jeremiah laid the paper flat. It was a birth certificate. A girl, born 15 years ago, named Leela Boot. Elijah, Jeremiah said, voice cracking. We got a sister. For a long time, nobody moved. The only sound was the soft hiss of firewood settling in the stove. Elijah finally looked up. Where is she? That's the problem, Jeremiah muttered. She ran off. Been living with a family out in Decatossum, preacher and his wife. But now she's gone. Disappeared a few months back. The folks she lived with think she's heading this way. June leaned forward slowly. Why here? Jeremiah looked at her. Because she's looking for blood. For family. And Booth is the only name she's got. Elijah stood, paced toward the window, hands clenched at his sides. You think she knows about Poss, about what he was? Jeremiah shrugged. Wouldn't take much to figure it out, and if she does, she'll be angry. Maybe worse. June stepped closer to Elijah, her voice soft but certain. If she's out there, she's scared, lost, like I was. She doesn't need truth all at once. She needs safety, and someone who won't flinch at her pain. Elijah looked at his wife and saw again what had drawn him to her in the first place. That quiet strength, that ability to speak to wounds, even before they were named. We bring her here, he said at last. No more running. No more secrets. She's one of us. Jeremiah looked uncertain. You sure? What if she doesn't want that? She don't have to want it today, Elijah said. But someday, she will. That afternoon, the three of them sat on the porch, watching the sky darken with storm. June stitched a torn saddlebag. Jeremiah cleaned his rifle. Elijah carved a small wooden horse. Rough, but honest. She might not even recognize us. Jeremiah said quietly. She don't need to, Elijah replied. She recognized what home feels like. That's more than we ever got from him. June glanced at them both. You two are more alike than you think. Jeremiah scoffed. He stayed. I ran. That ain't alike. June's voice was calm. You both came back. Lightning cracked far off in the distance, followed by a low rumble. The rain started slow, tapping the porch roof like cautious footsteps. And somewhere out there beyond the ridge, past the river, down the muddy trail was a girl with Booth blood and a fire in her heart. Elijah didn't know if she'd arrived broken, bitter, or hardened by the world. But he knew one thing. With a quiet certainty he'd come to trust in himself. She wouldn't be turned away. 3 days later, just after the rain stopped and the ground turned to rust-colored muck, June saw her first. A lone rider, not much more than a silhouette against the morning fog, weaving along the trail like she wasn't sure whether to keep going or turn back. The horse was skinny, ribs visible, even from a distance. The girl atop it sat stiff, like she didn't trust the animal or the road. June set down the basket of wet clothes she'd been carrying and stepped off the porch. Elijah, she called gently over her shoulder. I think it's her. He appeared in the doorway, Jeremiah close behind, both men watching the figure grow clearer as she neared. The girl couldn't have been more than 15. Dirty blonde hair pulled back in a rough braid, face thin, sharp-jawed, eyes too tired for her age. But it was those eyes that made Elijah inhale. Sharp and still. They were the same shade as his father's, not soft blue, but storm gray like thunderclouds rolling in from the east. June stepped forward as the girl slowed, dismounted, and stood on shaky legs. You La June asked. The girl didn't answer right away. just stared at them, at the cabin, at the man with eyes like her own, at the red-haired woman who stood with calm and open hands. I heard he's dead, Lila finally said, voice flat. Elijah nodded. He is. Good. June didn't flinch. You hungry? Lila shrugged. I ain't stinning. Just wanted to see what kind of folks carried his blood. Jeremiah stepped down off the porch, slower than June had. His tone was more cautious. And what did you expect to find? I don't know, Lila said. Maybe nothing, but I had to look. Elijah looked at her a long time, saw her coat was too thin, her boots torn, her eyes sunken like someone who hadn't rested in weeks, and despite all the anger in her voice, she hadn't turned to leave. Stay for breakfast, he said simply. Then, if you want to ride off after, no one'll stop you. She studied him, measured the offer, then finally muttered, fine, just food. Inside, the kitchen smelled of cornbread and fried eggs. Lila sat stiff at the table, one hand near her knife, as if expecting betrayal at any moment. She didn't touch the food at first, just stared at the fork like she'd forgotten how to hold it. June filled her plate anyway. You don't owe us anything, she said gently. Not even politeness. But you do deserve warmth and food. That's not a transaction. That's being human. Something cracked, then just a sliver in Lila's shoulders. She picked up the fork and ate like someone who didn't trust she'd get another chance. Later, Elijah walked her out to the barn, let her meet Boone, showed her the mare he'd raised from a foal, the one gentle enough for children but fast when it mattered. You always live out here? She asked, stroking the horse's mane. Most of my life. Why? He looked around the hills. Because this land's quiet. Honest. You plant something, you see it grow, or it dies. Either way, it tells the truth. She glanced at him. Truth ain't always a gift. No, he said. But hiding from it doesn't stop it from being true. That night, she stayed. Not because she trusted them. Because she was too tired not to. They gave her the small room at the back of the cabin, the one June had once taken when she first arrived. The walls still bore the tiny scratches from that first winter. Tally marks. Thoughts June had etched when she'd still thought survival might be temporary. Lila didn't speak much. The next day, she watched them, measured their routines. The way Elijah repaired fence wire. The way June read aloud while peeling potatoes. The way Jeremiah sat outside at dusk, smoking and whispering to ghosts he never named. And on the third day, she asked Elijah the question he'd been waiting for. Was he like this with you? Elijah didn't answer right away. You want the clean version or the true one? She didn't blink. True. He hit me twice. Once for dropping a calf in the river. Once for speaking my mind. After that, he never had to again. I learned what silence cost. Lila's hands balled into fists. He hit my foster brother every time he prayed. Said God wasn't for girls like me. Elijah's throat tightened. He was wrong. She looked up at him, tears in her voice but not in her eyes. Why didn't anyone come for me? I didn't know, he said. But now that I do, I ain't letting go. And that was the moment. She believed him. Not when he opened the door. Not when he gave her food. But when he didn't try to explain. They passed away that night. June found Lila sitting near the fire, wrapped in the same quilt that had once warmed her. I don't know what I'm supposed to be, the girl whispered. June sat beside her. You don't have to know yet. You're allowed to just be. That's where healing starts. Lila nodded. I don't think I believe in family. That's okay, June said, voice soft. We'll believe in it enough for you. Until you're ready. And outside, beneath the starlight, the land exhaled. Like even the wild hills knew something broken had just started to mend. Have you ever met someone who didn't know how to be loved until someone showed them how? Lila's just beginning her journey, but maybe her questions are ones we've all asked. Share your thoughts beyond. Stay with us. Because the hardest part of healing is letting it stay. The wind shifted 2 days later. One of those western changes that doesn't ask permission. It came down from the north, sharp and restless, carrying the scent of dry pine and something else Elijah couldn't name at first. He stood on the porch, hand resting on the rail, eyes scanning the far ridgeline, where clouds were thickening, like bruises across the sky. Spring didn't come gentle in these parts. It came wild. Dot inside the cabin. Lila had started leaving her boots by the door. A small gesture, but June noticed. Trust wasn't something you declared. It showed up in the little things, like how Lila now drank her coffee with both hands, instead of one hovering near her knife. Or how she stayed in the room longer after meals. Not out of obligation, just stayed. Jeremiah had taken to chopping wood early, swinging the axe like he was trying to outpace something that kept catching up. Elijah said nothing, but he knew the rhythm of avoidance when he heard it. That afternoon, Lila found Elijah fixing a cracked water trough. She didn't say anything at first, just handed him the bucket he'd forgotten by the barn. He glanced up, nodded, and kept working. "You think I'm broken?" she asked suddenly, voice flat. He paused, set the hammer down slow. "No, I think you've been bent by too many storms. But wood like that, it don't break easy. It just learns how to lean." She looked down, kicking at the dirt. "People keep saying I'm strong, but I don't feel strong. I feel tired. Sometimes being strong is just not leaving when the wind changes." Lila nodded, eyes glazed, but not distant. "You sound like someone who had to say that to himself more than once." He didn't deny it. That evening, a rider showed up, a boy from the town, 3 ridges over. Breathless, sweat streaking the dust on his face. "There's trouble," he said, voice cracking. "A man D'Antoni's looking for a girl with red hair and a silver ring. Says she stole something. And he's got 2 men ridden with him." June went still. Elijah stepped forward, calm but taut as a drawn rope. "Where was he last seen?" 10 miles east, heading toward Hollow Creek." Elijah thanked him, pressed coins into his hand, and sent him off with fresh water and jerky. When the boy rode away, the silence returned thick and heavy. Jeremiah broke it first. "If he comes here, we don't let him near the porch." Elijah shook his head. "He won't get close." June's voice was steady. "I'm not running. Not again." Lila stepped forward, voice like flint. "Who is he?" Elijah looked at her, then at June. He didn't speak of the saloon, or the bruises, or the nights June curled against the wall, too afraid to dream. Instead, he said, "A man who thinks women are things. Who's about to learn otherwise." That night, no one slept easy. They kept a lamp burning low, and guns oiled. But no one spoke of violence, unless it came for them first. The cabin felt smaller somehow, not from fear but from the weight of choosing to stay. June found Lila sitting near the fireplace, knees drawn to her chest. "I know what it's like," June whispered, settling beside her. "When someone tries to own your fear. But listen to me, Lila, that man, he's not bigger than this place. He's not bigger than the people who stand between you and hurt." Lila looked at her, mouth tight, and whispered, "I don't want anyone hurt for me." "You're not the reason for the hurt," June said. "You're the reason we're choosing to fight for peace." The storm arrived just before dawn. Not daunting, not guns, not fire, just thunder rolling like distant hooves. Rain striking the tin roof in waves, and wind tearing through the trees like a warning. They all sat inside that morning, quiet, listening, holding on to the kind of stillness that comes after years of unrest. When the knock came sharp, deliberate, they were ready. Elijah opened the door with Jeremiah behind him, June at the edge of the parlor, but it wasn't Danton. It was the sheriff, hat soaked, coat plastered to his frame. He looked tired, wet, and grim. "He won't be coming," the sheriff said. He pushed a girl in silver rock, broke her wrist. She screamed loud enough to draw a crowd. Someone recognized him. "We locked him up last night." Elijah nodded once. "Will he stay locked?" "Depends," the sheriff said, "on whether folks show up to testify." June stepped forward. "I will." The sheriff blinked. "You sure?" "I am now." And from behind her, Lila added, "I'll go too. Not for him, but for every girl who don't know how to speak yet." The sheriff tipped his hat. "I reckon that might just make the difference." That night, the rain slowed. The clouds broke enough to show the moon again, pale and steady. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, soft and warm. June sat curled beside Elijah, her hand resting gently on his knee. Lila leaned against Jeremiah on the bench, the weight of family not forced, but chosen. They didn't toast, didn't cheer, but they breathed fully, together, and for the first time in a long while, the wind outside didn't sound like warning. It sounded like change. The storm had passed, but the land still wore its memory. Trees bowed under the weight of water, soil turned to thick clay that clung to boots and slowed every step. The fields looked bruised, dark with promise and aftermath, but inside the cabin, there was a stillness that hadn't been there before. Not the stillness of fear, but the kind that follows a long breath, finally exhaled. The next morning, Elijah found Lila sitting out by the fence rail, her boots half-caked in drying mud, a journal open on her lap. The pages were mostly blank, just her name on the inside cover, written over and over, like she was trying to see if it still belonged to her. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside her with a tin cup of black coffee, the steam curling up between them like a fragile thread. She spoke first. "I thought I'd feel different after saying I'd testify." "You do," he said quietly. She looked at him, skeptical. "You're here," he continued, "and you're writing your name? That's different." She looked down at the page again. "I ain't sure who I am with it. Most of us aren't. Not at first." Back in the cabin, June was hanging herbs from the rafters, sage thyme, wild mints she'd foraged between storms. She'd taken to humming while she worked, not for anyone else, just for herself. Jeremiah, half dozing on the porch steps, lifted his head and listened like it was a song he'd heard before, but never understood until now. That evening, the family they'd become sat around a table worn smooth by time and elbows. There were no visitors, no threats on the horizon, no ghosts clawing at the door. Just a loaf of fresh bread, a pot of stew, and 4 souls, slowly learning what it meant to belong. "You remember that time Pa brought home that half-wild horse?" Jeremiah said, surprising everyone, even himself. "Said we had to break it for it broke us." Elijah nodded. "Kicked a hole in the barn wall." June chuckled. "What happened to it?" "He let it go," Elijah said. "Said some things ain't meant to be controlled." Jeremiah stared into his bowl. "I used to think that story was about the horse." Lila leaned forward, curiosity blooming in her brow. "What's it about now?" Jeremiah met her eyes. "Us." The silence after that wasn't heavy. It was whole. Later, while the dishes dried and the wind curled gentle through the open windows, June found Elijah staring at a small cedar box on the mantel. She stepped beside him, eyes soft. "Something on your mind?" He opened it, pulled out a letter he hadn't shown her. Folded parchment, old and yellowing. "It's from Ma," he said. "Wrote it just before she passed. I was 18. Didn't read it till after." He handed it to her. June unfolded it carefully, eyes scanning the faded ink. "Elijah, if you're reading this, I reckon you've made it longer than most in this world. That means you're strong, but don't let strength turn you cold. Let it turn you kind. The world will try to take your softness from you, but don't give it up. Not even when it hurts. You've got your father's hands, but not his temper, and that's a gift. Keep building. Keep protecting. One day, someone's gonna need you more than you know, and you'll know what to do." June folded it back slowly, holding it to her chest. "She was right," she whispered. "You did know what to do." He didn't answer, but the way his hand found hers said enough. That night, Lila knocked softly on June's bedroom door. "Can I ask you something?" June nodded, letting her in. The girl sat at the edge of the bed, blanket clutched in her fingers. "How did you know he wouldn't hurt you?" "I didn't," June said honestly. "But I watched the way he looked at silence. He didn't feel it. He respected it. Men like that, they don't need to take what's not freely given." Lila nodded. "Do you think he'll always protect us?" "No," June said, brushing a lock of hair behind the girl's ear. "I think he'll teach us how to protect ourselves." That night, the fire burned low but steady. The kind of flame that doesn't roar or demand attention, just stays. Because staying, Elijah had come to learn, was its own kind of love. The days lengthened into early summer. Wildflowers bloomed timidly along the fence lines, as if testing the air before committing to stay. Lila started waking up earlier, sometimes already in the field when Elijah stepped out with his morning coffee. June noticed she'd taken to braiding her hair tighter, like she was trying to hold herself together with her own hands. Jeremiah rode into town twice a week now, checking the mail, fetching supplies, bringing back news with few words and long glances. The third time he came back quite quieter than usual. He handed Elijah an envelope, then went to the barn without a word. The letter was short, a single folded page, creased and rain-smudged. Elijah read it once, then again slower, as June stood behind him, a shadow at his shoulder. "Booth, you think it's over. That locking me up put an end to what I built. But you're wrong. You took what was mine. Both of you. I ain't done. I'll find a way out, and when I do, I'm cumin. Not for her. For you." Elijah set the paper down like it was something that might bite. June didn't ask to read it. She didn't need to. Lila entered a moment later, dirt under her nails, a fresh bruise on her shin from a stubborn colt that refused her lead. She noticed the silence, the stillness in the room that had learned not to panic, but not to ignore signs either. "What's going on?" she asked, brows drawn. Elijah met her gaze. "Danton sent a letter. Says he's not done." Lila's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. What do? We prepare, June said calmly. But we don't run. Not anymore. Jeremiah returned from the barn, leaned against the doorframe. He's bluffing, man like that. Doesn't scare me. Elijah nodded slowly. He doesn't scare me either. But I'll be damned if he touches what we built here. They worked together that afternoon, not out of fear, but purpose. Jeremiah double-checked the locks on the barn doors. Elijah reinforced the hinges on the cabin shutters. June took stock of the pantry, of the tools, of the quiet ways she could make a home even stronger. And Lelouch stood out in the open pasture with Boone, teaching him to follow her lead without a bridle. That night, around the fire, no one spoke of Danton. Instead, Elijah pulled out his mother's old guitar. The strings were weathered, slightly out of tune, but the sound was full. He played softly, like the memory of someone who never shouted. Lila asked, "Did she teach you that?" He nodded. Before Pa got mean. Before he forgot how to listen. June curled her feet beneath her, mug of warm tea in hand. "You think some folks are just born with cruelty in their blood?" Elijah looked up at the stars. "I think some folks get twisted by life and some choose to stay twisted. It's the choice that matters." Lila whispered, "Then I choose different." And for the first time since she arrived, she didn't sound angry about it. She sounded sure. Later, when the fire had burned down to soft coals, June lay beside Elijah, her head on his chest, listening to his breathing. "Do you think he'll get out?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. "Maybe," he finally said. "Men like him, they don't disappear easy. But he'll find a different man waiting if he comes back. And me," June whispered. "He'll find me waiting too." The next morning, Lila placed a small package on the table, wrapped in cloth, tied with a leather string. "For if he comes," she said. Inside was a sketch. A rough drawing, done in charcoal. Danton's face, sharp and cold. Every scar and cruel line etched with purpose. She'd drawn it from memory, from nightmares, from strength. "So folks'll know," she said. "If he shows up again, they won't need to ask." Elijah nodded, deeply moved. "You're protecting more than just yourself now." She looked at him. "I learned from the best." Outside, the wind shifted again, cooler, steadier. Not a warning this time, a promise. Summer deepened. The fields turned gold. The river thinned to a whisper, and the earth gave off that dry sweetness that only came from sun-baked grass and long-forgotten rain. The cabin breathed quietly with its people, each one holding their own rhythm, now intertwined, steady, changed. Elijah had taken to rising before the sun, not from worry, but from purpose. He liked the silence before the world woke, the way the morning light spilled slow across the ridge, like a secret being told. June would often find him already working, mending harnesses, checking the fence line, his broad back moving with a kind of calm that only came from knowing your hands were finally building something that wouldn't fall apart. Inside, Lee was teaching herself to read better. She sat by the window with a worn book June had kept from her saloon, a collection of poems passed from hand to hand, until the spine gave out. She didn't read them aloud, not yet, but she'd started underlining words that felt like her. Hollow, brave, bloom, storm. Jeremiah wasn't smoking as much. He didn't say it, but June noticed. He talked more at supper, too, little stories from their childhood, old regrets told, with the kind of humor only a man who'd survived them could manage. And now and then, he looked at the road, not with dread, but curiosity. Like maybe it was safe to want something beyond surviving. Then the sheriff rode in again. He came at midday, dust caked on his coat, hat pulled low, his horse foaming at the bit. "He's out," the sheriff said before anyone could ask. "Danton escaped last night. Knocked out a guard. Stole a rifle. We don't know where he's headed, but he's come in here," Elijah finished. "He's got nowhere else." Lila's shoulders tensed. She didn't cry. She didn't even speak. She simply turned, walked back into the house, and began packing her small leather satchel. Elijah followed her. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," she said flatly. "He wants me. If I'm not here, he won't come near you." He stepped in front of her. "That's not how this ends. I don't want him to hurt anyone else because of me. He won't. You don't know that. I know who you are now, and I won't let you forget it." She looked at him then, really looked, and something cracked behind her ribs, not from fear, but from love that had nowhere to go when it wasn't used to being allowed. "I was always the one people gave up," she whispered. "I'm trying not to be that girl anymore." "Then don't run," Elijah said. "Stand. Not for him. For you." Outside, June had already started preparing. Quiet hands, sharp mind. She boiled water, filled jars with oil, checked the hidden rifle they kept behind the hearth. Jeremiah saddled Boone without being asked. No one panicked, no one shouted. That evening, they set up a lantern at the gate. A single light in the darkness, as a warning and more like a message. "We're not hiding." And then they waited. Danton didn't come that night, or the next. But on the third night, Lila woke with her breath tight, and the sound of hoofbeats in her chest. She stepped outside barefoot. The moon was high, the hills silent, and a man stood at the edge of the property line, just watching. Elijah joined her without a word. Then June, then Jeremiah. They stood together, not behind the gate, but in front of it. No guns drawn, just presence. Danton didn't speak, he didn't move. But even from that distance, Lila could feel the old fear rise like a fire in her throat. She stepped forward, past Elijah, past June's soft gasp, until she stood alone at the gate. "I'm not who I was," she called out. Her voice didn't shake. Danton took a step closer, but Lila held her ground. "I'm not scared of you anymore," she said. Silence stretched between them like a rope. Then slowly, Danton turned and rode away. He didn't run. He didn't charge. He didn't scream threats into the wind. He just left. And somehow, that was the scariest thing of all, how easily a man like him could vanish. When he realized he'd lost the power to make others small, Lila turned, legs trembling now, but her back straight. Elijah was already there to steady her. June wrapped her in arms that didn't ask for permission, and Jeremiah, gruff and tired, muttered, "Damn proud of you, kid." That night, they didn't sleep. They sat around the fire in silence, hearts still thudding. Not from fear but from the weight that had lifted. They didn't win with bullets. They won because they stayed. Summer waned slow, like it didn't want to leave. The grass turned brittle and gold. The wind softened into something almost sweet. And the sky stretched wide without particular ache. Only the western plains seemed to understand that mix of loneliness and belonging. Of things ending so something else could begin. It had been 3 weeks since Danton rode off, and never returned. No one knew where he'd gone. The sheriff said he'd disappeared into the Dakota edge. Maybe north, maybe east, maybe into the kind of nowhere only cowards ever call home, but no one chased him. He didn't deserve the attention anymore. And around the booth cabin, the days moved on, not forgetting, but choosing to live beyond. Elijah built a bench for the porch, sturdy, simple, carved from pine. He hauled himself from the ridge. He stained it dark and sat on it in the evenings, just listening, not to danger anymore, but to June's laughter, to Boone's snorting in the paddock, to the way the house creaked like it was breathing alongside them. June started tending a garden. Real rows, real seeds. No more scattered greens in window boxes. This time, she planted with the belief there'd be a harvest. Jeremiah didn't ride away. He meant to, once or twice. Saddled up, packed a bag, even said goodbye one morning before sunrise. But then Lila had come out, handed him a small, carved pendant trough shaped like a horse's head and just said, "I made it for you, so you don't forget what it feels like to be stayed for." He'd unpacked by noon. And Lilawell. Lila laughed now. Not often, not carelessly, but real. She still had bad nights. June would find her sometimes curled on the floor near the fire, sketchbook open but untouched, breath tight in her chest, like the dark was trying to crawl back inside. But she always let someone hold her now. And in the mornings, she'd stand tall again, braid tight, boots laced, mouth full of questions about the land, about the stars, about why forgiveness feels heavier than hate. One afternoon, a letter came. This time, not from Danton. It was from the family who'd fostered her. All those years, kind people with soft voices and sad eyes. They'd written to say they were proud, that they'd heard from the sheriff, that Lila's name was clear, that she had people who'd stood for her, and if she ever wanted to come visit, their door was open, but only if she wanted. She held the letter in both hands for a long time, then folded it neatly and set it on the shelf. "I already got a home," she said, "but I might ride out one day, just to say thank you." Jeremiah ruffled her hair, and this time, she didn't duck away. That evening, the four of them sat out on the porch, sun going down slow, sky burning orange and purple, like some kind of quiet miracle. June leaned into Elijah's shoulder. "Did you ever think this was how your life would look?" He chuckled. "Never. But I reckon if I had, I'd veer run from it. Didn't think I deserved it back then. And now." He looked around the porch, the cabin, the girl sketching wildflowers in the dirt. his brother napping in the rocker, his wife humming softly. Now I know I do. Not because I earned it, but because I stayed. June nodded. That's all love really asks, isn't it? Stay, even when it's hard. And Elijah whispered, especially then. The lanterns glowed warm behind them. Boone snorted and shifted in the paddock. A coyote called from somewhere over the ridge, but didn't come closer. The world had teeth, sure, but it also had tenderness. And in this little patch of dust and grass and firelight, tenderness had one dot for now. Maybe forever. But even if not, they would still be ready. Because love like this, made from broken things and late forgiveness, didn't need forever to be true. It just needed now. And they had now. Sometimes, the strongest stories don't end in gunfire or glory but with, for people on a porch, watching the light fade, knowing they've made it through. If you've walked this journey with Elijah, June, Lila, and Jeremiah, tell me, what part stayed with you most? And if this story made you feel a little less alone, maybe share it with someone who needs reminding. We're all just learning how to stay. Thanks for traveling with me through the dust, the dark, and the light. Until the next tale, partner.